Welcome back to this week's episode of the Seatown Podcast, where Seattle business owners, entrepreneurs, and community leaders are invited on to share their stories with us. I'm your host, Christian Harris. As the owner of an indie real estate brokerage here in Seattle, I'm naturally interested in various communities around Seattle and what makes each of them so unique and distinct. And local businesses and organizations play a large part in shaping the flavor and character of the neighborhoods that we love so much. So join me as we talk with these fascinating people and explore their stories of why they started their businesses, run their nonprofits, or otherwise are making an impact in the Seattle area. Today I'm joined by Tracy Record, one of the co-owners of the West Seattle blog. Thank you for joining me today. I know you were very busy. As everyone who calls West Seattle home, they know the West Seattle blogs, where they go for the latest information, what's going on in the area, what's new, what's happening. So it's kind of fun to hopefully turn the tables a little and hear a little bit about your backstory and how you got into this, and be able to hopefully tell the rest of West Seattle, where you guys got the idea and where it came from.
Yeah, well, we didn't actually get the idea. The idea kind of evolved. Sometimes we say that we were drafted into it. I started the site as a personal thing in December of 2005.
Okay.
At the time, there was no place to talk about West Seattle online. There had apparently been some forums a few years earlier somewhere and so forth. And we'd lived here 15 years by then, and I wanted to just kind of ramble on. I started to observe things. I'd been in the media myself for many years. I was still working in TV then. And so I looked around, I found the address westseattleblog.com, and I thought, okay, well, this might be a little audacious, but maybe I'll just start a little site. And so I started posting things every couple days or so, something I saw. I would be out on a walk with my son, who was then about 10 years old, and little news tidbits pointing at the time to whoever was reporting them.
Sure.
And then what happened, I always say the turning point was the famous December 2006 windstorm. And the West Seattle had thousands of people without power, but for the mainstream media, other areas of the region were getting more attention because they were even worse off. As bad as it was here after the windstorm,
sure.
Bellevue had 1 million people without power. There were people dying in Burien from carbon monoxide poisoning. They brought barbecues inside to keep warm. So it was understandable, but people were writing to us. By that time, we had a few hundred, maybe regular readers. They'd say, "You seem like people that might know something about what's going on. Do you know anything about when we're going to get the power back?" Mm-hmm. Our power ourselves was out for like 4 days. Yeah. And from there, we just sort of started covering news. And then a year later, we decided to make a go of it as a business. Again, I've been a journalist for decades.
Sure.
I was working in TV news. My husband has a journalism background and also an advertising background.
Okay.
And people had asked us if we would even consider running ads because they started to see the value that the site brought to the area and thought maybe we could at least, make some sort of money off it. And we just sort of decided to take a leap entrepreneurially and turn it into an actual publication. So that was December of 2007, I quit my TV job, and we started doing it full time. So this year we're celebrating our 10th year, which is pretty amazing.
So before then, you were both working other jobs, just kind of do this on the side for fun before 2007?
What I was doing was I'd been a manager and a producer in TV news for more than 20 years before then, going back to 1984. And so during the sort of transitional year plus of the site, almost 2 years really, I would just post to it in the morning or in the evening, stuff that was absolutely unrelated to my work. Even when we were covering the famous power outage, I was on a week-long vacation from my TV job once the storm had calmed down, and so we were gathering information fully independently, just literally by driving around. Sure. Patrick has worked in radio, news, advertising, various forms of sales and things, and he also has a journalism degree from the University of Colorado. So we both have kind of complementary backgrounds. Currently, he's chief photographer, runs the business aspect of the site. I am the full-time editor and chief reporter and so forth, and that's always where my strength has been, in actual news gathering and processing.
Sure. So from the get-go, were you guys primarily the ones producing all the content and whatnot? I mean, now you obviously get updates from people, writing in or emailing in stories.
Well, it's sort of what it's sort of two things. We don't actually have people, aside from a few freelancers, we don't ask people to do full journalism work and just do it as a volunteer sort of thing. We still primarily produce the site. I'm still the only full-time editor. There is no time when I am not the editor on duty, 24/7, 365.
So you might get leads from people in the community.
Oh, absolutely.
You guys follow up on it.
That's the fun part of it, is that, and we call it community collaborative news, because we've cultivated to the point where we say, let us know what you see, what you hear, if there's something to check out. If you saw, that was one of the things we were doing while on the way here. Yeah. Somebody said they had seen a sign on a window somewhere, and so we pull over, run up, check out the sign. If it says something interesting, take a picture. Sure. Then so we've taken their lead, and then we riff on it by going and contacting public relations persons or going into the building. Or in many cases, I do a lot of work with public records, the kind of public records I'm sure as a realtor you're familiar with, property records, building permit records, and things. Right. And that's where you find out. Yeah, and there's a lot of it. And the good thing about that is it can be done 24/7, so I can do that at 2:00 in the morning.
Sure. What was the big impetus, I guess, for taking that leap from a secure job to we're gonna try our hand at entrepreneurship and turn this blog into a full-time gig?
Well, there were two parts to it. One is that it was clear that there was a need. There was a lot that was going not covered around here. But the other part of it, personally and selfishly, is that TV wasn't working so well for me anymore, because the kind of things that we were expected to do as a manager, I had to tell people to go knock on the doors of grieving families and things like that I just didn't think was right. I didn't a lot of what I had to tell people to do was stuff that didn't ethically sit with me. So the chance at possibly creating something where we make the rules, we can behave with stronger ethics and more respect for people was really appealing. And there was always the chance at the time that it's like, okay, if this doesn't work out, guess I can go back. I don't know that I could anymore, but at the time at least.
Okay, what do you love most about your business, about running the West Seattle blog?
The part, I think it is hearing from people, both when we can reassure people that something isn't what they're afraid of. People will want to know, what are all the sirens, what's the helicopter doing overhead, and I can tell them hey, they're just getting a picture of the backup of the ferry line, or there was a big response for a possible house fire, but it turned out not to be a bad fire and they're all being canceled. So there's some reassurance. There's also the satisfaction often of finding out something that people didn't know about and needed to know about. We had a big story a couple of years back where there was a plan that the City Parks Department had been working on for a year without telling the public to possibly put a commercial zip lining enterprise in Lincoln Park, in an area where people enjoy nature, wildlife, trees, birds, etc. And little hints of it came to the attention of a community volunteer group, and they asked us if we'd heard anything about it. And my eyebrows rose out of my face, and I started researching it. And we broke the story, and we followed up on the story. A community group that covers that area picked up on it, called a community meeting, and there were 200 people that were shouting down the City Parks Department, which 2 days later dropped the plan. Yeah. So things like that, and that's the best of journalism, is when you can bring something to light that might not be right.
Sure. Yeah, we can bring it to light and then affect some change for what the community actually wants.
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously you both have journalism backgrounds. A blog's a little different, media format. Was there anything really surprising or unexpected when you first started full-time, doing the West Seattle blog?
Well, one of the interesting complications when we first started was that we had been, before we went professional, we'd been anonymous. Partly because I was working in the media community, partly because we had a real strong feeling about internet privacy. And then when we decided we were going to make this a business, obviously there was no question. Sure. The more surprising than one thing is that if we had known that we were going to turn out this way, I wouldn't have used the word blog, because once in a while it still gets in the way if we have to deal with people who aren't in West Seattle, and so they're not necessarily familiar with what we do, and that's more these days more people out of state than just out of the area. Sure. I have to explain, we're not a blog is just the publishing format, etc. But it's been so long now that we can't really change. There's in the search engines, in interviews we've done over the years and everything, if we just change the name, it just wouldn't work out. So we have to work with that. And it's funny to think that it's difficult because, for example, newspapers have had weird names over the years. Sure. the Times, Picayune, Bulletin, sure. Shoe Bell, Moosehorn, whatever. Yeah. And yet still we're sort of stuck with that, and I still have to explain it.
Sure. Well, it's kind of funny because I mean, there's kind of I guess the stereotype that blogs is kind of someone in their basement doing whatever, but then you have like the Seattle PI, which is essentially a glorified blog now because they don't have a print format anymore.
Yeah.
But they've kind of had that name, that reputation, their newspaper, so they don't have to really deal with that. But it's kind of funny.
Exactly, yeah, and they're still owned by a large company, but they still, they have very few people, but they still have the benefit of that. And we're on the other side around. We've only been around for 10 years, so while we do a heavy amount of news coverage, we don't have the benefit of a long history that might have paved the way.
Sure. Now, when you guys started doing this, I mean, was there any other neighborhood blogs, or are you guys kind of blazing a trail when as far as that goes?
Elsewhere in the country, there were a few pioneering operations, but the interesting thing, the kind of the parallel path that has happened around here is us and CapitolHillSeattle.com, which also started around 2005 as sort of a personal project by a young man that has I call him young man because he's younger than I am anyway, has a journalism background and a tech background. And then about the same time as us, in 2007, he turned it professional, and he is still going strong after 10 years. There have been some other people along the way, starting there in the early 00s, that have tried it, and their sites either scrap the sites altogether, or they've kind of pulled back to where they're sort of just glorified event calendars, which is kind of sad, but it really is, a tough thing. And if you don't figure out how to run it as a business, then there's really no chance that you can go on forever as a sideline.
Sure. Interesting. So I mean, it's obviously a business. You're able to make money with advertising and sponsorships and whatnot. So I mean, is your day to day any different than a normal entrepreneur? I mean, how do you guys usually start your day?
Yeah, it's good to be able to work out of the house, which is great because it's just steps from waking up to going and sitting down at the computer, or even better, checking the site on the phone without even waking up. Roll over for another 20 minutes. Approve a few comments. And I think it's really a whole lot like other entrepreneurs. It's something that you wind up winding work and life together. People say that to us, say, how can you do this 24/7? It's, well, the cool thing is we can go out to lunch and we've got the laptop along, we've got the phone along, I can update the site on the phone, and then that's, so we take a little break there, but then we go to the community meetings from 7 to 9 o'clock and so forth, and it's, we're on call in the middle of the night. We encourage people to text us or call if something happens. They hear the sirens, they don't see anything on the site, and they do. And so once in a while, that something will happen at 4 o'clock in the morning, and we'll get up and go out and cover it. And that's just a commitment we made. A lot of people who do this don't do it 24/7. They just say, well, we'll follow up on the breaking news later in the day. But once you have people who are wanting to know what all the sirens are at 4 a.m., it's kind of hard not to find out at 4 a.m.
Sure. Especially if that's what you're known for,
Yeah.
You hear a helicopter going overhead, 5 minutes later, there's going to be something on the blog.
Yeah, that made a really big difference. I don't know if we would have been so successful if we weren't able to, to answer those questions. Because otherwise people can get some of that information themselves. You can get a flight tracker, you can click on the little helicopter and sort of try to deduce what it is. But putting together the various information sources, also having the background where I worked in local news for a scabillion years, that is still kind of a unique skill set.
Sure. What with having that skill set, what would you say is your greatest strength as it pertains to what you do?
It's a strength and both an importance that we're really, really honest to a fault, to where we really are dedicated to being truthful, to being open, to either explaining how we came across a bit of information, to saying, we're not going to do that and here's why, to really simple things like, if we go cover a restaurant opening, we don't eat anything because, that would be like accepting a gift, and there's ethical, rules that,
sure.
But wanting to, accuracy has been one of our great strengths because I really know how to source things, and I won't publish something that's a rumor, something that is maybe this is true. There's no room for that. And that's why, especially in this age when trust is all the more important, we're lucky to have built that.
What would you say that you're passionate about?
Passionate about, I think passionate about the, being able to help the community. Helpfulness is something that I've always wanted to do. It goes back to I was a radio disc jockey in a time 35 years ago when people were still able to take requests and play what people called in about. And it was great to be able to fulfill someone's request. They called up, they wanted to hear a particular song. I could go dig it out of a stack of vinyl records, find it, and actually put it on the air. Sure. And it's the same thing here, is that like yesterday, somebody wanted to know what was being done about a pothole on 35th Southwest, and a couple of other people had emailed the week before and said, what in the world is going on with 35th? The pavement is awful in this one stretch. And so I said, you know what, I'm working on a long-range story about that. Then yesterday, this pothole meant that we had to accelerate that a bit. So I was able to find out information about the long-range paving plan, what's our city council person doing to try to pressure to make things happen sooner, and something simple as what's happening with the hole in particular at this spot. And it's all a matter of sort of answering people's requests. It doesn't mean that we answer everything that comes along, because once in a while there's something that's just silly or it's out of the area or something, but we do the best we can.
Sure. Yeah, it seems like 35th is just disintegrating.
And Delridge and Roxbury and so what's the city going to do?
Right. Yeah, for sure. In regard to kind of the community aspect of it, being able to answer people's questions and stuff, what sort of things do you guys do, I guess, are involved with, with obviously there's West Seattle Blog sponsors and businesses that support you guys, and you guys are the West Seattle Summerfest, and I'm sure other things. What do you guys kind of do on a regular rhythm to interact with and support, engage with the community?
Well, one of the things that we do that no one else does is cover community meetings that happen, and a lot of them are the regular community councils. West Seattle has more than a half dozen of them, and we make it to, we seldom miss them. Either I or Patrick will go and we'll write a report on that. And those are places where there are community members who are, deeply involved in things that are going on. So we know them from there, and that leads to other information. Sure. Then in the vein of Summerfest and whatnot, one thing that we sponsor every year, which is West Seattle Community Garage Sale Day, which is the second Saturday in May. We didn't start it, but we picked it up after it was 3 years old, and its original sponsors couldn't put it on anymore. So every year we coordinate that, we take sign-ups, we make the map, and that becomes a day where thousands of people are selling things, running around town. It's awesome. We've had more than 300 sales the past 2 years. It's really interesting. And then when spring and summer happen, we get involved with most of the big events, often as sponsors, like so many local businesses do. From when you see the poster or the T-shirt for something, and there's all these lines of businesses, and we, both financially support, promotionally support, and in other ways. And so in some of those, we wind up on scene. The Morgan Junction Community Festival, Delridge Day, Summerfest has been a whole different story all its own, because about 9 years ago, we wound up being part of the information booth with the West Seattle Junction Association and the West Seattle Chamber of Commerce. And so that's where we wind up headquartered every year, and it's part where people can come up and ask us questions. But the most important thing is for us to be able to be immersed in festival information and be able to point people there, because the Junction Association doesn't have a whole army of volunteers or staffers to do that. So it wound up as kind of a synergistic thing. So every year we get to be right in the middle, and we do all our live reporting from there. Okay, it's day one, here's what's happening. Okay. And it's a blast. Same thing with and the car show in the summertime. We sponsor the West Seattle 5K, which is a benefit for West Seattle High School across the street from you. That's coming up in less than 2 months now. And it's great because of the nature, the way that the community works in spring and summertime, where everybody has to get out. So at all of these things, you get to see so many people, especially Summerfest. Sometimes it's like the great reunion. It's people we only see annually because they come down to the booth in Summerfest and say hi.
Yeah. What have you found to be the most challenging aspect of owning and running the West Seattle Blog?
The time commitment, because we decided to do it 24/7, 365. There are some people who do this sort of thing in other cities in the country, and they shut down at 5 o'clock on Friday unless there's a breaking story over the weekend, and they ratchet up again at 8 a.m. Monday. And that's the way they decided to do it, but we decided to do this, and we still haven't really found a way to have some backup. We did once take a vacation where we couldn't be in touch continuously. Sure. But since then we've found ways where we can go out of town and it just comes with us, and as long as we have somebody here to photograph or to go to a breaking news scene. And the other real challenging thing for anybody who has a business is to look into the future and see, okay, well, where is this going?
Sure.
And what's going to happen? And will it be something that we run for 15 years and then it doesn't exist anymore, or will we find someone that would take it over? Luckily that's not something that's staring us right in the face.
Yeah.
But anybody who runs a business has to at least know that that's way out there on the horizon.
Sure.
Somewhere.
Sure. Can you give us a glimpse into what you foresee the future holding for you guys and the business?
Well, for the not so short term, we still have a fair amount of good years in us. So I wouldn't want to stop doing this because A, it's the best job I've ever had, and B, it's still something that needs to be done even in a time where there's so much information out there. It's not information that's processable to people to necessarily be able to make sense of what's going on in their community. So there's still a value in that. I would like to be able to we're always kind of looking out for hard news journalists or people that that have been in the business to bring somebody into the fold who might want to take it into the future, but for now, what we're doing is what we've been doing for some years, which is, reporting the news as it happens. We overhauled the site technically about a year ago. There's still some tweaks that need to be done. Things like that. It's sometimes, as as an entrepreneur, you kind of have to keep just the day-to-day ahead of you. It's like, what am I going to do today to get to tomorrow?
Yep.
And then how do I think about next week and maybe next month? And
right. Yeah, you got to figure out the long-term stuff while you're keeping the business going day-to-day. It's very challenging. On the technical side, what is the website WordPress based or?
Absolutely, we've been WordPress since the start, and the funny part was that we chose, and again, keep in mind that I started this as a personal thing, and then it just sort of evolved rather than making a clean break and saying, okay, now we're launching this. So what we evolved to, what we had until a year ago, was a WordPress theme that somebody created in like 2004. It was a really simple, basic little theme. There wasn't much that could be done with it. It was kind of cutesy. And then when we overhauled a year ago, we had to, because that old theme got stuck at a version of WordPress that was more than 3 years old. It could not go forward.
Yeah.
And so we had to have the theme changed and make sure that all of our archives, we've published over the years 44,000 stories, 350,000 comments, some 5-digit number of forum posts. And so we had this humongous database, and it all had to go forward. There was no question of just, of throwing anything away, because this is 10 years of West Seattle history. And so we got that, and we, added a few features. And as if you, run on WordPress, it, as it gets up to speed, that there's more things that it makes it possible to. And so now it works a little bit better, but, it was a big project, and it's still not over yet because there's still some things that need to be improved.
Yeah, I think it works pretty good. It's optimized for mobile, which is very big these days. And so how many people do you actually have working at the West Seattle blog? Is it just you and Patrick as far as paid, and do you guys do everything? Or?
We're the only full-time people. We have a half-time person who works with our calendar and also to do some other research. We're in the process of someone that's done that role for a long time is leaving, and we're training somebody new now. And that's the person that, for example, makes the phone calls before Christmas to find out which restaurants are going to be open on Christmas Eve,
Sure.
New Year's Eve. A surprisingly popular feature. And other research points like that, because there's a lot of things that just require either phone calls or visits and relentless things that somehow it would fill an entire day without any actual writing involved. Right. So we have that person's a half-time person. And then we have about 4 people currently who are various freelancers who might do a story here and a story there if I come up with something I need to assign somebody to. Also some photography help. There's a gentleman named Christopher Buffoli who has been a photographer with us on a freelance basis for almost the entire 10 years. Yeah. He just kind of happened in as a contributor, and in that time it's been really interesting because he's become an internationally known art photographer. He photographs he makes these art creations called big appetites, which are these tiny figures and big food in sort of whimsical scenes.
Okay.
And it's been great to follow his success. But he'll see something on the 911 log that whether we are on it, and he'll run off to it, and he'll contact us, and he's a great photojournalist. Right. And get some information and pictures, and then we have coverage. He seems to have radar for times when it's something that we can't get to easily, yeah. Or also he's kind of headquartered on this half of West Seattle. We are down near Lincoln Park, and so if something happens on Alki and it's breaking news, it takes forever sometimes to get up here.
Sure.
Need that hovercraft.
Sure. Well, it's great that you have that. Is that primarily how you were able to start taking vacations and being able to like not have to physically be here 24/7?
To have a backup like Christopher and a couple of other people, just because even though there's so much information you can gather even without getting somebody to the scene, sometimes you can't. There was a time we were out visiting our son in Boston last December. There was an awful crash not far from where we are. And while we called the police, we called the fire, we were listening to an online scanner from a coffee shop in Boston. As soon as we got a text about it, there was a bit of information we couldn't get. Christopher finally was able to get to the scene after a while, and he was able to get that one detail,
Sure.
and that was really important.
Sure. Do they still use like press passes and like that sort of thing like you see in the movies?
Yes, actually, that was one of the first things we did when we went full time back at the end of 2007. Is we spoke to the Seattle Police Department, which is really the only credentialing agency around here,
Okay.
and we got press badges, which we still use to this day. I don't even know if they still issue them anymore. But when you go to certain things, to be able to show that, just so that you're legit. Otherwise, we've got business cards, and
Sure.
but if people don't know you, it's tough to try to explain, because these days anybody looks like they just walk up to something, they've got their
Sure,
camera
start
phone,
filming
and
or whatever, yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. It's that advice would definitely help prepare you for the difference between working your 9 to 5 and going into entrepreneurship as well. So
Yeah, and it's for anybody that owns a business, because
Yeah,
it's your
does it,
business,
and
you're accountable for it.
Yep. What is a personal habit that you say contributes to your success?
The personal ethics, honesty. My mommy told me, just basically, don't ever lie, and somehow that just got really instilled in me to where I'm like, incapable of being, dishonest, dissembling, anything like that.
Sure.
And in this particular business, it really helps, because if you feel that way, then it shows in your work, and then you can actually, be trustworthy and be genuinely trustworthy. And then there's nothing behind you that's going to, bite you because you accidentally told somebody something that wasn't true.
Sure. Sure. Not to mention, especially in this day and age, and the profession you're in, that's especially valuable when the days of clickbait and false news and misleading whatever, like.
We're really glad
valuable.
not to engage in that, especially in clickbait.
Yeah.
Patrick and I were having a conversation about that earlier today, because if you work for a large corporation still, which all the TV stations here are, and I've worked for 2 TV stations in Seattle, you have metrics that you have to live up to. There's expectations, and now with online metrics, which weren't so big when I got out 10 years ago, they're all just sitting around all the time saying, okay, well, here's how many people clicked on this, and how many people went to this Facebook post, and how much this, and then that governs what you're able to do. And they say, no, we don't do stories on that because nobody clicked.
Sure.
And that's, it's a problem that TV used to have with overnight ratings and things. Obviously, like anybody else with a website, we have access to metrics, but we don't go drilling down that way to say, oh my gosh, we shouldn't cover Fauntleroy anymore because no one cares about Fauntleroy. We just sort of look to make sure that, people are still tuning to the website, and they do. If there's a day where there's a big story, then suddenly there's this huge spike, and
Right.
and then to make sure that everything else at least is at a pretty decent dull roar the rest of the time.
Sure. Do you have a specific internet resource or application that you can't live without, like Evernote or something in the running of your business?
We're kind of Luddite in terms of not using Slack or anything like that. Since most of the communication is between Patrick and me, that's more a matter of he's over in his home office in that corner of the house, and I'm over in my corner,
Sure.
so we can like shout at each other. So
Sure.
so that's particularly handy. The things that I can't live without are more the research devices that are out there, which we try to educate people about sometimes in stories, like the Seattle 911 real-time log, and King County Parcel Viewer to find information about properties.
Yep.
I look up on the liquor licenses on the Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board website every day, because that's where you get first word of new restaurants, things like that.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, there's a long list of that stuff. If I had to hand it all over to somebody someday, I'd just,
Sure.
take forever.
Has that been published in a blog post on the website, or just kind of something that's up in the noggin?
Mostly there. The pieces come out in context when they're relevant. And that was also something I've always enjoyed, which is if there's a chance to have kind of a teaching moment and to say to people, show your work. This is where we got that information.
Sure.
Or somebody actually wrote us the other day and said that they do some sort of food, and they wanted to know how we found out about restaurant openings that were coming down the line, because because they wanted to hit these people up with a solicitation, but they always seem to get there one step behind. And so Patrick, in fielding this inquiry, asked me and said, so how do you come up with these things? And I said, it's really hard. And sometimes it's just like a piece of paper somebody put on a window, and we go driving up and down the arterials as often as we can to see signs of what's happening.
Do you listen to podcasts?
No, I don't have time to do much listening or watching of anything. It's an all-consuming gig. Sure. Although, of course, I listened to yours after you first mentioned it to us last summer.
Okay. Is there any particular episode that stuck out to you?
Oh, I'm trying to think of who the person was at the time. No, it was a local business person, and it was you do a pretty straightforward conversation about like the one we're having here about what's that person about and what's the business about. I think that's really helpful. There was a guy who tried a West Seattle podcast for a while. We were on his, but he's moved on to Los Angeles and shut it down. And he also was trying to tap into the community. And it's always surprising to me on how little of that is happening around here, which is why it's something that there's that if people knew more about it, that they would probably find out more about their town just by listening.
Sure. I just enjoy meeting the people and being able to provide you can go to a website, and maybe if the website's good, you can kind of get a little feel for, the business, but you rarely see the person and the story behind, why and how they started it.
Yeah. And yet we have so many new people coming in. So I've lately started to sort of write and say, if you're new, here's the backstory about this thing that otherwise I'm writing it as if everyone knows all about it,
sure.
and trying not to assume that they do.
Sure. If you could recommend just one book to our listeners, what would it be?
Oh, gosh. Again, my reading tastes are weird, but probably I would recommend the grammar and punctuation book, Eats, Shoots, and Leaves.
Okay.
As someone that's made my living in the written word, or in TV the spoken word for so long, it's a book that in a humorous way demonstrates what a difference proper punctuation and so forth can make. There was even a lawsuit recently where somebody didn't use the Oxford comma, which is the last in the series of commas, and they lost the lawsuit because it meant a whole different thing for their... Sure. Some people may not care that much, but it's funny, writing is an important part of everybody's job anymore, no matter what you do, even if you're not a journalist or a novelist or whatever.
Sure. So I'm guessing that since you enjoy that book, I can guess your answer, but double space or single space?
Oh, single space.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
As we close up here, can you share one piece of parting guidance with the listeners?
I think what I would advise or suggest or even request from people is to consider, as their time allows, to get a little bit more involved with their community. There may be somebody who hears this who already is deeply involved. They're in the PTA, they're in a community group, etc. But there's so much going on, and we publish as much as we can about everything, whether it's something as simple as a fundraising drive or a community meeting you could go to or a community cleanup. And it's amazing what just putting 1 hour into it can do. And I know what it's like to not be ready for that, because before Patrick and I did this, we weren't involved. We'd been in West Seattle for 15 years, and we didn't know much about what was happening in the community. We were raising a young child, and we were too busy, and I had a 12-hour day job downtown, blah, blah, blah. But I look at it now and I think, if people just realize that maybe they could spare that hour, they could spare that 2 hours, or they could contribute to an online crowdfunding that's helping a classroom get this thing that they need that's not being funded by the government. It's amazing what little bits of difference do. And that's what I like the most. It's great. I've mentioned as we started this that, reassuring people, oh my God, it's not a big fire, is great. But also publicizing a fundraising drive and hearing that people really did respond and that it made a difference in somebody's life, a classroom full of kids or something. It's like, yay.
Sure. That's great. Off the top of your head, do you have any recommendations for a few different ways people could get involved?
Well, obviously, my biggest recommendation is to read our site as often as you can, because we make a big deal out of spotlighting things, both in standalone stories and also our calendar will mention that. One of the find out who your community council is and if they have regular meetings, and if there's one you might just go and sit in on, or send somebody from your neighborhood. It's really, really amazingly simple. There's not really a general search way to do that, but if you go to Google and put in your community name, know what your neighborhood is called. Are you in North Delridge? Are you in Fauntleroy? Are you in Highland Park?
Great. And also, if people are interested in knowing a little bit more about some of those local nonprofits, all my podcast guests in December were nonprofits. Chris with the West Seattle Helpline, Nancy with Westside Baby. Some great local organizations that rely heavily on volunteer and donations.
Those are two places they're absolutely great to start. We recommend those to people all the time because they have so much of a community reach.
Yep. Thank you, Tracy, for your time. I appreciate you coming on here and hearing some of your backstory of how you and Patrick took the brave leap into entrepreneurship. And from all accounts, it looks like you guys are doing very well and succeeding and serving the community in a very tangible and appreciated manner. So thank you.
Thanks for having us on.
That wraps up this week's episode. Make sure to check out our guest website, pay them a visit, and otherwise support what they're doing. If you have questions, know someone who should be a guest here, or has a story worth sharing, email me at christianharris@seatown.com. That's sea-town.com. I would also be honored if you could go to iTunes and leave us a review and a nice 5-star rating. We work hard to bring on great guests and provide exceptional content, and getting a review from you is one way to help the podcast rank well on iTunes so others can find and enjoy the show as well. You can also find out more about me, how my real estate indie brokerage and our unconventional approach can help you with your Seattle and East Side real estate needs, and other projects I'm working on by visiting seatown.com. That's sea-town.com. Thanks for listening. Today's intro and outro music is courtesy of the Fascination Movement. You can find their albums in the iTunes Store. The Seatown podcast creator and host is Christian Harris. You can listen to more episodes and find all our show notes on our website at seatownpodcast.com. That's sea-townpodcast.com. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you in a week for our next episode. This has been a Seatown Media production.